The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the shadows darker. That's what Sarah thought the night she clocked out for the very last time. After 30 years of saving lives, she thought the only thing waiting for her was a pension and a quiet porch. She was wrong. In the span of a single heartbeat, Sarah went from a retiree holding a sheet cake to the most valuable asset on American soil. She wasn't trained to kill. She didn't carry a gun, and she had no clearance. Yet before the sun rose, the most lethal men on the planet Navy SEALs would drop their weapons. Look her in the eye and call her ma'am. This is the true untold story of the night a nurse commanded the elite. The fluorescent hum of St. Jude's emergency room was a sound Sarah Jenkins had lived inside for 3 decades. It was a frequency that sat in her bones, somewhere between a mosquito whine and a flatline. Tonight, however, the frequency felt different. It felt final. At 58, Sarah wasn't just a nurse. She was an institution. She had the kind of face that had seen everything from the crack epidemic of the 80s to the pile-ups on I-5, etching deep lines around eyes that remained startlingly kindly blue. She wore her scrubs like armor, the fabric soft from 1,000 washes, blue fading to gray. "I still don't accept it," Dr. Halloway said, leaning against the nurse's station, spinning a pen nervously. He was a good doctor, young, frantic, the kind Sarah had to silently guide through intubations until his hands stopped shaking. "Who's going to tell me when I'm about to kill someone with the wrong dosage?" Sarah smiled, tapping the stack of patient files on the counter to align them perfectly. "You'll read the chart, David, like I've told you 1,000 times. It's not the same," he muttered. "It is time," Sarah said, though her voice wavered. She looked at the clock, 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until she was no longer Nurse Jenkins. 5 minutes until she was just Sarah the widow, who lived in the Craftsman house on Elm Street, the woman whose cat, Barnaby, was currently the only living thing waiting for her. The break room party had been sweet, but rushed. A sheet cake from Costco with "Happy Retirement" written in a sugary blue gel that had started to run. A card signed by 50 people, half of whom she barely knew. A plastic watch from administration that probably stopped working if it got wet. It was a humble end to a heroic career, but Sarah didn't want a parade. She just wanted to sleep for a week. Code Blue Bay 4. The intercom crackled. The instinct hit her like a physical blow. Her body tensed, her feet shifted to pivot, ready to run. Then she saw young Jessica, a nurse fresh out of school, sprint past her with a crash cart. Sarah forced her heels back to the floor. Not my fight, she told herself. Not anymore. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Standing still while chaos erupted 10 feet away. She walked to the time clock. It was an old biometric scanner that always required 2 tries. She placed her thumb on the glass. Beep. Accepted Jenkins S. Shift End 0001. She let out a breath she felt she had been holding since 1994. She grabbed her tote bag, her umbrella, and the half-eaten box of cake she'd promised to bring to her neighbor. Walking out of the ER doors, the cold Seattle air hit her face, smelling of wet asphalt and pine. The silence of the night was jarring after the cacophony of the hospital. St. Jude's was undergoing renovations, so the staff was parking in the overflow garage on 4th, a brutalist concrete structure that always felt damp. Sarah pulled her coat tighter. The streetlights reflected in the puddles, creating a kaleidoscope of neon smears. She was tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond sleep. She thinking about a hot bath. She was thinking about the bottle of Pinot Noir she had saved. She wasn't thinking about the black SUV idling 3 blocks down with its headlights off. She wasn't thinking about the man watching her through a thermal scope, whispering into an encrypted radio. Target is mobile. She's alone. Package is secure. Sarah reached the crosswalk. The signal chirped. She stepped off the curb, her white nursing shoes splashing into the gutter. If she had turned around, she might have seen the shadow detach itself from the alleyway. If she had listened past the rain, she might have heard the heavy rhythmic tread of military boots on pavement. But Sarah was looking forward toward a future that was about to be violently stolen. The parking garage was a cavern of echoes. Level 3 was nearly empty, save for Sarah's beat-up 2015 Honda CR-V and a dusty pickup truck parked suspiciously close to the ramp. The overhead sodium lights buzzed, flickering in a way that made the shadows jump. Sarah fished for her keys, the jingle sounding impossibly loud. She unlocked her door, tossing the tote bag onto the passenger seat. She paused. A smell. Hospitals smell of antiseptic blood and stale coffee. This smell was different. It was sharp chemical. Chloroform. No, something sweeter. Ether. And underneath it, the metallic tang of ozone and high-grade gun oil. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It was the same sixth sense that told her a patient was crashing before the monitors beeped. She spun around. Nothing. Just the concrete pillars and the reserved for staff signs. "You're getting spooky, old girl," she whispered to herself. She got into the car and reached for the door handle to pull it shut. A gloved hand slammed onto the door frame, stopping it dead. Sarah gasped, looking up. A figure loomed over her. He was massive, dressed in black tactical gear that looked nothing like a mugger's clothes. No logos, no patches, just matte black fabric and a balaclava that covered everything but eyes that were terrifyingly calm. "Sarah Jenkins?" the man asked. His voice wasn't a growl. It was professional flat, devoid of emotion. "Who? Get out of the car, ma'am. Please. We don't want to hurt you." "Take the car." Sarah stammered, her hand fumbling for her pepper spray on her keychain. "Take the money. I have $20. "We don't want your money," the man said. He reached in his movement a blur. Before Sarah could even raise the pepper spray, he had secured her wrist. He didn't twist it. He just held it with the immovable force of a hydraulic press. "We need your hands." "Help!" Sarah screamed, the sound tearing at her throat. "Fire someone, help!" The man sighed as if disappointed. "Sleep," he said. He pressed something against her neck. A hiss of compressed air. The world tilted sideways. The concrete ceiling of the garage seemed to melt into the floor. Sarah felt her legs turn to water. She slumped forward, but she didn't hit the steering wheel. Strong arms caught her, lowering her gently. "Target secured." A voice floated through the haze. "Vitals stable. Move out. We have a 20-minute window before the grid locks down." Sarah fought the darkness. She tried to remember the license plate, the face, anything. But her nursing brain was shutting down, analyzing her own sedation. Ketamine. Rapid onset. The last thing she felt was the rain on her face as she was carried out of the garage, not like a prisoner, but like a piece of precious, fragile cargo. Waking up was violent. Usually sedation wears off with a groggy slowness. This was a chemical slap. Someone had cracked an ammonia inhalant under her nose. Sarah jerked back, coughing, her eyes watering. "What? Where?" "She's back. Give her room." She blinked, her vision clearing. She wasn't in a hospital. She was in a warehouse, or maybe a hangar. The ceilings were 40 feet high, lost in shadow. The space was illuminated by portable floodlights, powered by a generator that hummed aggressively in the corner. She was sitting on a metal folding chair. Her hands were not tied. She looked down. She was still in her scrubs. The cake box was gone. "Mrs. Jenkins," a voice commanded her attention. She looked up. Standing in front of her was a man in a suit that cost more than her house. He was in his 50s, silver-haired with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He looked familiar, like someone she had seen on CNN, maybe in the background of a press briefing. Behind him stood 4 men in that same heavy tactical gear, holding rifles that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. They were facing outward, scanning the perimeter. "I am going to ask you to do something," the suit said. "And if you do it, you will go home with $5 million in an offshore account. If you do not, you will die here." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but 30 years of ER trauma had built a strange kind of resilience. Panic was useless. Assessment was everything. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice raspy. "If you want money, you have the wrong person." "I don't need money," the man snapped. He stepped aside. Behind him, on a makeshift table made of shipping crates, covered in sterile drapes, lay a body. Sarah stood up. The guard's tensed fingers hovering over triggers, but the suit waved them down. Sarah walked toward the table drawn by the professional compulsion to help. The patient was a young man, maybe 30. He was stripped to the waist. His body was a map of scars, but the fresh wound was in his upper right quadrant. A gunshot wound, through and through. It had been packed with combat gauze, but the blood was soaking through dark and venous. "He was hit 2 hours ago," the suit said. "We can't take him to a hospital. We are persona non grata right now." "He needs a surgeon," Sarah said, touching the skin. He was cold, clammy, shock. "I'm a nurse. I can't operate." "We don't need you to operate," the suit said. "We have a surgeon on a secure line." He pointed to a laptop set up on a crate, showing a live feed of a masked doctor. "But we need hands, experienced hands, and we need blood." Sarah frowned. "Blood? He has the golden blood type," the suit said. "Arch null. Less than 50 people in the world have it." Sarah froze. The world stopped. She knew her blood type. It was a medical anomaly she had discovered in nursing school. It was why she was on a special donor list. It was why the Red Cross called her every 56 days like clockwork. "You kidnapped me for my blood," she whispered. "We kidnapped you because you are the only Rh null donor within 500 miles of Seattle," the suit corrected. "And because you are a trauma nurse who can manage a transfusion in the field while keeping him alive." "Who is he?" Sarah asked, looking at the young man's face. He was handsome in a rugged way, but pale as death. "That doesn't matter," the suit said. "Hook it up." One of the tactical soldiers shoved a transfusion kit into her hands. It was military grade. Sarah looked at the kit, then at the man in the suit. "You know that if I give him a direct transfusion, without cross-matching, without processing the risk of reaction, is—" "Do it," the suit roared, his composure cracking. "He has 10 minutes before he codes." Sarah looked at the patient. She didn't see a criminal or a terrorist. She saw a young man dying. The politics didn't matter in the ER, and they didn't matter in a warehouse. "I need an IV line, 16 gauge, she barked, her fear replaced by the charge nurse voice that terrified residents. "I need saline." and I need you to shut up unless you're handing me something." The suit blinked, surprised by the tone. "Do as she says," he told the guards. Sarah rolled up her own sleeve. She was proficient at sticking herself. She'd done it for Deimos before. She found the vein in the crook of her elbow, slid the needle in, and watched her own dark red life force flow into the bag. Once the bag was full, she disconnected herself, taped it off, and turned to the young man. She found a vein in his collapsed arm, no easy feat, and started the line. "Stay with me," she whispered to the unconscious man. "I gave up my retirement cake for this, so you better not die." As her blood began to flow into him, the monitors stolen from a hospital she noted began to beep with a slightly stronger rhythm. "Stabilizing," Sarah said. "BP is coming up. 80/50. "Good," the suit said. He checked his watch. "Prepare for transport. We move in 5. "He can't move," Sarah protested. "He's unstable. If you move him, he'll bleed out internally." "We aren't safe here," the suit said. "They are coming." "Who? The people who put that bullet in him?" Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse cut out. Pitch black. Then a red emergency strobe began to pulse. Crack, boom! The main doors of the warehouse blew inward, twisting metal, screaming like a dying animal. Smoke canisters hissed across the floor, filling the room with thick white fog. "Contact front!" one of the guards screamed. Gunfire erupted. It was deafening. The sound of automatic rifles in an enclosed was like a physical assault. Sarah didn't think. She grabbed the transfusion bag to keep it from ripping out of the patient's arm and threw her body over his. "Get down!" she screamed at the unconscious man, shielding him with her own retired, tired body. Bullets sparked off the metal crates around her. The man in the expensive suit took a round to the shoulder and went down, screaming. The tactical guards were firing back, retreating. Through the smoke, Sarah saw green laser sights cutting the air. These weren't the kidnappers. This was something else. Something faster. More precise. A figure emerged from the smoke, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace. He wore multicam patterns and panoramic night vision goggles that made him look like a robotic insect. He double-tapped one of the kidnapper guards. 2 shots, 1 sound. The guard dropped instantly. The operator swung his rifle toward the table, toward Sarah. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the patient's hand. "Please," she whispered. The laser dot danced on her forehead. "Check fire! Check fire! Civilian on deck!" A voice roared through the chaos. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it began. "Secure the room. Room clear. Left side. Clear." Heavy boots rushed toward her. Sarah looked up, trembling. 3 men stood over her. They were giants. The lead man flipped his night vision goggles up. His face was painted in camo, sweat, and dirt, streaking the green and black. He looked at the patient, then at the blood bag, then at Sarah. He saw the needle in her arm. He saw the needle in the patient's arm. He saw the direct line of life connecting them. He lowered his weapon. "Identify," he barked. "Sarah!" she yelled, her voice breaking. "Sarah Jenkins. I'm a nurse. He's dying." The operator looked at the patient. His eyes widened. "Valid target acquired. It's him. It's Viper." He tapped his radio. "Command, this is Bravo 1. We have the package. He is critical but alive. We have a civilian providing aid." "Get him out of here," Sarah said, her instincts overriding her terror of the men with guns. "He needs a level 1 trauma center. Now." The operator looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the bruising on her arm, the fierce protection in her eyes. "We can't go to a hospital, ma'am," the operator said. The ma'am wasn't sarcastic. It was heavy. "We have a chopper 2 minutes out. Can you keep him alive for 20 minutes? Sarah looked at the devastation around her. She looked at the seal. "I kept a man alive with a plastic spoon and a shoelace once." She lied, well, mostly lied. "Get me a ambi bag and help me lift him. And don't you dare drop my blood bag." The seal blinked. Then a small, grim smile touched his lips. "You heard the lady," he shouted to his team. "Move!" The run to the extraction point was a blur of motion and noise that Sarah would relive in nightmares for years to come. The chopper wasn't a sleek medical evacuation unit. It was a ghost grey Blackhawk, its rotors churning the heavy Seattle rain into a localized hurricane. Go, go, go. The team leader, whose name Sarah had learned was Hayes, screamed over the roar. Sarah was flanked by 2 SEALs. They didn't drag her. They moved with her, their bodies acting as human shields against the debris kicking up from the asphalt. She was still clutching the IV bag, holding it high like a lantern in the darkness, tethered to the gurney that 4 other men were sprinting with. They reached the open bay door of the helicopter. Strong hands grabbed her tactical vest. Someone had thrown a ballistic vest over her scrubs and hauled her inside. "Strap in!" a crew chief yelled, pointing to a canvas seat. "No!" Sarah yelled back, shaking her head. She pointed to the patient Julian, as she'd decided to call him since package felt inhumane. "I need to stabilize the line. The vibration will blow the vein." Hayes looked at the crew chief and nodded. "Secure her to the deck. She stays with the package." The crew chief hooked a safety tether to Sarah's belt and clipped it to the floor. She dropped to her knees beside the stretcher, the cold metal of the helicopter floor vibrating through her shins. The helicopter lurched upward, banking hard. Sarah's stomach dropped, but her hands remained steady. She checked the flow. Her blood was still moving. But the patient was pale, his skin turning a translucent grey. "How far?" Sarah screamed into the headset Hayes had shoved over her ears. 20 mics out." Hayes's voice crackled. "We're heading to the Titan." "He doesn't have 20 minutes, Sarah shouted. She looked at the portable monitor. His oxygen saturation was dropping. 88%. 85%. "Miller," Hayes barked. "Get on the bag." Miller, the team's medic who had taken a graze to the thigh during the breach, crawled over. He looked young, maybe 25, with eyes that were currently wide with panic. "Ma'am, I'm an EMTB with combat training. I plug holes. I don't know how to manage a transfusion reaction. He's not reacting," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the panic. She placed a hand on the patient's chest. It wasn't rising on the right side. "Damn it," she hissed. "Tension pneumothorax. The pressure change from the altitude is expanding the air in his chest cavity. His lung has collapsed. It's crushing his heart." Miller stared at her. "We need to needle him." "Do you have a 14-gauge angiocath?" Sarah demanded. Miller fumbled with his kit, his hands shaking from the adrenaline and the pain in his leg. He dropped the needle. It skittered across the vibrating floor. "Useless?" Sarah didn't mean to be cruel, but there was no time for politeness. She ripped her own kit open, the one she kept in her tote bag, for emergencies, though it was mostly Band-Aids and aspirin. No needle. She looked at Hayes. "Give me your knife." Hayes didn't hesitate. He pulled a serrated combat knife from his chest rig and handed it to her, handle first. "Ma'am," Miller asked, horrified, "you can't perform a thoracostomy in a moving helo with a combat knife. "Watch me," Sarah said. She ripped the patient's shirt further open. She found the 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. She didn't have lidocaine. She didn't have a sterile field. She had a dying boy and a jagged knife. "Hold him down," she ordered. Hayes and Miller pinned the unconscious man's shoulders. Sarah looked at the boy's face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She made the incision. A hiss of escaping air whistled out audible even over the rotors. Blood bubbled pink and frothy. "Finger!" she yelled. She jammed her gloved finger into the hole, sweeping to clear the lung away from the chest wall, creating a vent for the trapped air. The patient gasped a jagged, desperate intake of breath. "O2, sat rising," Miller yelled, staring at the monitor. 90%, 92%. Sarah slumped back against the cargo netting, wiping sweat and blood from her forehead with her forearm. She was trembling now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality that she had just performed battlefield surgery with a weapon of war. Hayes was staring at her, the hardened commando. A man who had likely seen things that would break ordinary men. Looked at the 58-year-old nurse in muddy scrubs with an expression bordering on reverence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quiet over the comms. Sarah looked at him, her blue eyes tired but fierce. "I'm the head nurse of the night shift commander, and you boys are making a mess of my patient." Hayes actually laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "Copy that, ma'am. We're 10 mics out. Hang tough." But Sarah was fading. She had given a pint of blood, endured a kidnapping, and fought a battle. The edges of her vision were blurring. She leaned her head against the cold metal wall of the helicopter, her hand still gripping the patient's wrist, feeling for a pulse that was finally slowly strengthening. She closed her eyes just for a second. "Ma'am Sarah, stay with us." The darkness was warm and inviting, and much quieter than the helicopter. When Sarah opened her eyes again, the world was white and sterile. For a terrifying second, she thought she was back at St. Jude's, and the last 6 hours had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But then she felt the sway, a gentle rhythmic rocking that wasn't an earthquake, but the movement of something massive displacement water. She tried to sit up. "Easy, Sarah. Easy." A hand gently pushed her shoulder back down. She looked to her right. Sitting in a chair next to her bed was a man in a white naval uniform. He had 4 stars on his collar. An admiral. Beyond him, standing guard at the door, was Hayes. He was out of his tactical gear, wearing fatigues, his face scrubbed clean of camo paint, revealing a sharp jawline and tired eyes. "Where am I?" Sarah croaked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "You are aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford," the Admiral said. His voice was deep, authoritative, but kind. "I am Admiral Vance, and you, Mrs. Jenkins, are the guest of honor." Sarah blinked. "The boy." "The patient. He is in surgery," Vance said. "Dr. Aris is removing the bullet fragments now. He is stable. Because of you." Sarah let out a breath. "Who is he?" "You can't tell me he's just some soldier." The Admiral exchanged a look with Hayes. He stood up and walked to the small porthole window. "His name is Julian Thorne," Vance said. "He is a CIA deep cover operative. He has spent the last 2 years embedded in a syndicate that traffics nuclear material. When he was compromised, he didn't just run. He swallowed the encryption key to a server that contains the identities of every buyer in the Eastern Hemisphere." Sarah's hand went to her throat. He has the key. The people who took you. Hayes stepped forward, his voice low. They were mercenaries, hired by the syndicate. They knew Julian was hit. They knew he needed blood. They hacked the medical database to find a donor. They found you. They were going to kill me, Sarah said, the realization settling in cold and heavy. After the transfusion, the man in the suit, he said I wouldn't leave. We know, Hayes said, his fists clenched at his sides. We were tracking Julian's transponder, but the signal was weak. We were 5 minutes behind. If you hadn't delayed them, if you hadn't insisted on that IV line, he would be dead, Vance finished, and the intel would be gone. You didn't just save a man's life, Sarah. You likely prevented a dirty bomb from going off in a major American city. Sarah looked at her hands. They were clean, now scrubbed pink. I just did my job. No, Vance said firmly. Your job ended when you clocked out. What you did after that was something else. The door to the sick bay opened. A surgeon in blue scrubs walked in, pulling down his mask. He looked exhausted. Admiral? The surgeon nodded. Then he turned to Sarah. You must be the nurse. Is he okay? Sarah asked, swinging her legs over the side of the bed, despite the dizziness. He's asking for you, the surgeon said. He's awake. Barely. The anesthesia is wearing off. We haven't extubated yet, but he's writing on a notepad. He won't give the key to anyone else. He wrote the nurse 3 times. Vance looked at Sarah. Can you walk? Sarah stood up. Her knees wobbled, but Hayes was there instantly offering his arm. It wasn't a gesture of chivalry. It was the support of a teammate. I can walk, Sarah said, straightening her back. She looked at her reflection in the metal cabinet. Her hair was a disaster. Her face bruised, but her eyes were clear. Take me to him. They walked through the corridors of the aircraft carrier. It was a city at sea. Sailors stopped and pressed themselves against the bulkheads to let them pass. Word had evidently spread. Eyes followed her, not with curiosity, but with respect. They saw the Admiral. They saw the SEAL team leader, and between them, a 58-year-old woman in oversized hospital pajamas. They reached the ICU. Julian was hooked up to more machines than Sarah had ever seen in a civilian hospital. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. The tube was still in his throat, but his eyes were open. Dark, intelligent eyes that tracked her the moment she entered. He lifted a hand, weak and trembling. Sarah went to his side immediately, bypassing the Admiral, bypassing the guards. She took his hand. It was warm now. I'm here, Julian, she said softly. I'm Sarah. He squeezed her hand. With his other hand, he tapped the notepad on the tray table. Sarah picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible scrawl. Safe, yes, Sarah said, smoothing the hair back from his forehead, a motherly instinct she couldn't suppress. We are safe. You are on a carrier. The Navy has you. He looked at her, searching her face for the truth. He saw it. He relaxed his shoulders, sinking into the mattress. He wrote again. Thank you. For the blood? Sarah smiled, tears prickling her eyes. You have a rare type, kid. We're blood brother and sister now, which means you have to listen to me. Rest. He shook his head. He wrote one more thing, ripping the page off and handing it to her with a desperate intensity. Sarah looked at the paper. It was a string of alphanumeric characters. The code. The key to the nuclear network. She looked at the Admiral. Vance stepped forward, his face pale. He trusts you, Vance said. He wouldn't give it to us. He waited for you. Sarah handed the paper to the Admiral. Take it. and then get out. My patient needs to sleep." Vance took the paper as if it were a holy relic. He looked at Sarah, then snapped to attention. Slowly, deliberately, the 4-star admiral saluted her. Hayes, standing by the door, did the same. Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Oh, stop it," she fussed, adjusting Julian's blanket. "Just get me a cup of coffee. A real one, not that hospital swill." But the drama wasn't over. As the admiral turned to leave to secure the intelligence, the ship's intercom blared. The tone wasn't a general announcement. It was a general quarters alarm. The rhythmic bong 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 of imminent combat. "Captain to the bridge." The voice over the tannoy was tight controlled. "Vampire, vampire, vampire. Inbound missiles detected. Port side." The ship lurched as the massive engines kicked into overdrive. Hayes grabbed his radio. "Sit rep. We have 3 anti-ship missiles inbound." A voice crackled back. "Originating from a trawler 3 miles off the stern. It's a suicide run. The Syndicate is trying to sink us to destroy the asset." Sarah looked at Julian. He was trying to sit up, panic in his eyes. "Lie down," she ordered him. "We need to move him to the escape pods," Hayes said, grabbing the gurney. "If those missiles hit this deck, is the impact zone." "He can't be moved," the surgeon yelled. "He's open. I have drains in. If we stay, we die," Hayes roared. Sarah looked at the monitor, then at the thick steel door of the ICU. "Lock it," Sarah said. Hayes looked at her. "What? Lock the blast door," Sarah yelled, pointing to the heavy hatch. "If we move him, he bleeds out. If we stay, we might take a hit. But this is a warship, isn't it? Trust your ship. Trust your crew. I am not moving this boy 1 inch." Hayes stared at her for a split second. The decision weighed on him. The missiles were seconds away. "Seal the hatch," Hayes ordered the guard. The massive steel wheel spun, and the door hissed shut, sealing them in a steel tomb. Sarah grabbed Julian's hand again. "Hold on," she whispered. "This is going to get bumpy." Outside the phalanx, CIWS guns roared to life, the sound like a giant chainsaw ripping through the sky as the ship fought for its life and for the life of the nurse who refused to run. The sound of a phalanx CIWS close-in weapon system engaging an incoming missile is not a sound you hear. It is a sound you feel. It is a vibrating, tearing roar, often described by sailors as R2-D2 screaming while firing a chainsaw. Inside the sealed ICU of the USS Gerald R. Ford, that sound vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the medical trays and sending ripples through the IV fluids. "Brace for impact," Hayes yelled, throwing his body over Sarah, who was still shielding Julian. Brrrrt. The ship shuddered violently. It felt as if a giant hand had grabbed the keel of the massive vessel and shaken it. Boom! The first missile was intercepted less than 500 yards off the port bow. The explosion was close enough that the shockwave slapped against the hull. The lights in the ICU flickered and died instantly, replaced by the crimson glow of emergency battle lanterns. "One down," Hayes shouted into his radio. "Status on 2 and 3. Vampire 2 is skimming. It's under the radar deck." The radio chatter was frantic. Sarah didn't flinch. In the red light, she looked like a statue. Her eyes were fixed on the cardiac monitor, which was now running on battery power. Julian's heart rate had spiked to 140. "Julian, look at me," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the panic of the warship. It was the same voice she used when a child was scared of a needle. Look at me. Ignore the noise. It's just noise. Julian's eyes were wide, darting around the room. He was a spy, trained to withstand torture. But he was helpless, strapped to a bed, his body cut open, trapped in a metal box under fire. That kind of vulnerability breaks men. "Talk to me," Sarah commanded. "Tell me about your dog. You have a dog." "No," Julian rasped, wincing as the ship listed hard to the right. "Cat, named Buster." "Good. Tell me about Buster." "He's fat," Julian whispered. "Bert!" The second burst of gunfire was louder. Closer. Crash. The ship didn't just shake this time. It jumped. Metal screamed somewhere nearby. The blast door to the ICU buckled inward slightly, the paint flaking off from the heat of an explosion in the corridor outside. Debris rained down from the ceiling tiles. "Direct hit on the mess deck," the radio screamed. "Fire in Section 4, casualties reported. That's 20 feet from us," Miller, the medic, whispered, looking at the door. "If the fire spreads to the oxygen lines, then we deal with it," Sarah snapped, not looking away from Julian. "Miller, check the door seal. Hayes, get me a wet towel." "A what?" Hayes asked, blinking. "Smoke is going to come through the vents," Sarah said calmly. "I need to cover the patient's airway. Move." The elite Navy SEAL, a man who could kill with his bare hands, ran to the sink and soaked a towel. He handed it to Sarah, who gently placed it over Julian's nose and mouth. "Breathe shallow, Julian," she said. "Just like that. You're doing great." The third missile was the most dangerous. It was a diver, programmed to pop up and dive vertically onto the deck. The ship's alarms were a deafening, continuous wail. The list of the deck was becoming severe, maybe 10 degrees. Equipment was sliding across the floor. "Impact imminent." Sarah leaned down, putting her lips right next to Julian's ear. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. "I promised. I am right here." She gripped his hand so hard her knuckles turned white. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying that the suture lines she had protected so fiercely wouldn't tear. There was a moment of silence, a heartbeat where the guns stopped, then a dull thud, followed by a massive distant whoosh. "Splash 3, splash 3. The voice on the radio cracked with relief. "Target destroyed. No detonation." It was a dud, or the jammer scrambled it. It hit the water. The ship slowly began to right itself. The vibrations ceased, replaced by the urgent, organized shouting of damage control parties fighting the fire in the corridor. Hayes slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He pulled off his helmet, sweat pouring down his face. He looked at Sarah. She hadn't moved. She was checking Julian's drain output. "Clear," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "No fresh blood." He held together. She looked up at Hayes. In the red emergency light, surrounded by the smell of cordite and smoke, she smiled. "You boys sure know how to throw a party," she said. Hayes began to laugh. It was a hysterical release of tension laugh. "Ma'am," he said, shaking his head. "Remind me never to play poker with you." The blast door hissed. Someone was trying to open it from the outside. "Open up damage control." Hayes spun the wheel. The door swung open, revealing a hallway filled with grey smoke and sailors in firefighting gear. Admiral Vance stepped through the smoke soot on his pristine white uniform. He looked at the room, the overturned trays, the hanging wires, the nurse standing defiant over her patient. "Report." Vance coughed. "Patient is stable," Sarah said, crossing her arms, "but I'm going to need a new room. This one is drafty." Vance looked at her with a profound, quiet intensity. He looked at the SEALs who were looking at her like she was a deity. "Mrs. Jenkins," Vance said softly, "consider it done." The silence of Elm Street was louder than the guns of the USS Gerald R. Ford. It had been 21 days since Sarah Jenkins had been airlifted off the deck of an aircraft carrier in the middle of a missile crisis. 504 hours since she had stood in a sealed room, shielding a spy with her own body while the world exploded around them. Now she was just Sarah again. Or at least she was trying to be. The government had been efficient, terrifyingly so. Within 48 hours of the ship docking at a classified naval station in San Diego, Sarah had been flown back to Seattle on a private Gulfstream. Her car, the battered Honda CR-V, left in the parking garage that rainy night, was sitting in her driveway. It had been detailed, the interior smelling of vanilla instead of old coffee. The dent in the bumper from 2018 was gone. Her bank account, which usually hovered around a few $1,000s of savings, now contained a balance that made her dizzy every time she checked it at the ATM. $5 million, labeled simply as Consulting Fee Department of Logistics. The neighbors, of course, had questions. Mrs. Gable, the nosy widow next door, who spent her days peering through her blinds, had ambushed Sarah the moment she returned. "We were so worried," Mrs. Gable had chirped, eyeing Sarah's slightly bruised face. "The hospital said you took an emergency leave, a family crisis in, where was it, Ohio?" "Yes." Sarah had lied the falsehood, tasting like copper in her mouth. "A sick aunt. It was intense." "Well, you look like you've been through a war, dear." Sarah had just smiled, a tight, brittle expression. Something like that. But the transition wasn't working. Sarah found herself waking up at 3:00 a.m., her heart hammering, listening for the thump, thump, thump of rotor blades. She found herself analyzing the veins of the cashier at the grocery store, calculating insertion points. She was a hero who couldn't tell her story. She was a millionaire who still clipped coupons out of habit. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. On a Tuesday afternoon, under a